Hey everybody, just wanted to say thanks for subscribing to the channel and looking forward to doing more stories for you and hoping more people subscribe. I'm going to do one more of my stories here called I Thought My Squirrel Had the Bubonic Plague, and I realize now it's something far worse. I never pictured myself keeping a pet squirrel. I'd had cats and dogs, birds and gerbils as pets when I was a kid. For the last couple years, I hadn't had any animals. Still, when I saw the baby squirrel lying in the grass on the way home from work, I had to stop and check it out. Little guy looked only a few weeks old, its fur barely grown in, shaking and squeaking, making sad little noises with its tiny mouth. It was just a few yards away in the grass. I couldn't understand where its mother could be. Maybe she'd been hit by a car, I thought sadly to myself. Picked the poor thing up in my hands and cradled its tiny body in my arms, careful not to crush it with my oversized man mitts. Little thing had been shivering when I picked it up, but settled down after a few minutes, fell fast asleep. Its tiny breaths quick, its heartbeats fast and steady, beating so hard I could feel it through its back. I made the decision then that I needed to take it home and nurse the little guy back to health. So I got back to my apartment and I made a little house for it out of a shoebox. I put a towel inside. The tiny squirrel curled up immediately and went to sleep. Next morning, I had to figure out what to feed the thing as its hungry squeaks and squeals woke me up with the rising sun. Quick check online. Found I could feed it the little creature goat milk and a few other easily obtainable ingredients. Left him in his little box alone and went out to get supplies, feeling oddly guilty as I closed the door on its pitiful calls for help from its mother. When I got home, I found it asleep in its shoebox once again. Woke up to the sound of my voice, and I poured the goat milk into a baby bottle that I'd purchased, and I managed to nurse the squirrel back with the bottle. It sucked greedily on the goat milk and made happy little burping noises and ran around a little bit afterwards. Let it out on the floor of my apartment. It scurried around and dropped its little turds on my floor with reckless abandon. It was pretty adorable. Came to love the little guy as he grew in my home, and I nursed him back to health. I couldn't figure out what was wrong with him, though. He always seemed hungry and was never full, no matter how much I fed him. He grew very quickly into the largest squirrel I'd ever seen, nearly the size of a cat. Whatever hormonal issues he had, I thought it didn't affect him much. He'd still run around and like to play with toys. Seemed odd, though. He didn't look completely squirrel-like. He looked like a mutant squirrel with his long, sharp teeth and oversized body. And the difference between him and the rest of his kind only grew more obvious as he got bigger. And then he began to develop these little red marks all over his body. I Googled the shape of them and found a nursery rhyme. One...
Here's what I found on the web.
One from the Middle Ages. Ring around the Rosie, pocket full of posies. Ashes, ashes, we all fall down. What did that have to do with a rash? I kept reading, growing more and more horrified. The song was one that they had taught children back in the Middle Ages. Like I said, Ring Around the Rosie was the distinctive rash that accompanied the plague. It was believed that the bad smells caused the sickness, and so a pocket full of posies would supposedly keep you healthy. But even still, many died, obviously, and were turned to ashes. The song, a reminder that we all fall down dead eventually. I refused to believe my little pet squirrel could have the Black Plague. I mean, it was possible. No, it was impossible. The little bugger was cute as the dickens. There was no way he could be carrying a disease that wiped out at least a third of Europe in the Middle Ages. The good news was, even if he did have it, the internet said there was a cure for the bubonic plague. So I walked Mr. Peanut Butter down to the nearest veterinary clinic and told them my suspicions. They were not particularly welcoming, but agreed to treat my pet squirrel on the condition that I left him with them, and went to the nearest hospital myself to seek treatment, since I had most likely been exposed. And no sense starting another pandemic, they said. The hospital, they weren't welcoming very either. When I told them my situation, I already had started developing ring-shaped rashes on my skin, and while they forced me to call everyone I knew and worked with, my boss wasn't happy. I had been coming in for my shifts and exposing people, but I explained I hadn't known until just then. I told them I'd just been trying to do the right thing, attempting to save a poor dying baby squirrel. When I was released from the hospital, I went back to pick up Mr. Peanut Butter. The veterinary clinic was just about to open when I pulled up, so I waited in the parking lot and waited for a while. Nobody came out to the front to open the door. I double-checked the hours on their website, tried the door handle. It wasn't locked, so I went inside. When I walked in, the first thing that stood out was the blood. It was everywhere. It was covering the walls, the floors, the ceiling, the lobby, everywhere. Behind the reception desk, I found myself walking through it despite rational common sense that would normally tell a person to call the police and not to walk into a crime scene. I had a terrible suspicion and couldn't stop. My brain felt fuzzy since the rings had begun to form on my skin, and I had begun to lose all sense of self-preservation. My shoes made gummy, sticky sounds as I stepped through puddles of dark, hemolyzed blood. I walked up to the counter on trembling legs and looked over it to the other side, and there was no one there, just more blood, lots of it. Proceeding carefully, I went back into the first examination room. I opened the door and let out a choked whimper. There was no one in there, just more blood. Gallons and gallons of blood. Still fresh. Still no doctors, no veterinary techs, no pets or their owners. What the hell had happened here? A voice in my head whispered, now that I knew what had happened here. I scratched at the red circle on the back of my hand. A red splotch at its center was intensely itchy. I couldn't stop scratching it and suddenly noticed blood starting to leak from it and pus. I went to the next examination room and the next and the next. Nothing but blood, blood, blood. I heard a crash from the back room and found myself walking slowly towards the door that opened up to the kennels and workspaces of the back building. I opened the door and stepped inside the large room. Cages were stacked to my right where animals were hiding, terrified, in the backs of their kennels. The dogs whimpered, but the cats were silent. None of them dared to hiss or make a sound to agitate the large, furry form which lurked on the other end of the room. The creature which crouched over the human remains was once my pet squirrel, Mr. Peanut Butter, but now something far worse. It had grown quickly from all the flesh it had consumed and was now over 6 feet tall and didn't resemble a squirrel very much at all. It was eating noisily, tearing off pieces of skin from a veterinarian, his face long gone and his gleaming skull protruding through gaps in his flesh. His eyeballs had been ripped out, I noticed, and his feet and left arm were missing. Mr. Peanut Butter? I heard my voice saying without really thinking. His head whipped around, and I quickly realized that this thing was no longer my friend. I tried to back up and reach for the door behind me, but it was already too late. It raced towards me on its powerful hind legs, impossibly fast, its long, sharp teeth bared and dripping. As it plunged at my neck, it was covered in blood and slippery. I managed to stop its face from biting into my throat. It came at quite a cost. My hand ended up in the thing's mouth. As I tried to push it away, its sharp teeth bit into my hand, and blood went everywhere as the thing bit down again and again, gnawing on me and taking off strips of flesh, its eyes red, its face pure hatred, its long tongue lapping up blood like it was chocolate syrup dripping from an ice cream sundae. The dogs and cats in their kennels were howling and barking and hissing, now cheering me on. My crazed mind thought. I wondered if the creature's long teeth could puncture metal bars. I looked around desperately for a weapon, anything that would help, and there was a mechanical pencil on the desk next to me, and I grabbed it with my free hand. I plunged into Mr. Peanut Butter's eyeball and watched as black blood sprayed out and everywhere. The creature howled in fury and pain, and increased its attack, swiping at my belly with its long and impossibly sharp claws. I stabbed the pencil into its head again and again and again, trying to reach into the soft tissue of its brain, its ear, through its nose, its eye socket, any opening that would allow me entry into this horrifying gray matter of my giant pet squirrel's mutated brain. The black liquid poured out from the creature's wounds and mingled with mine, seeping into the holes in my hand where the bite marks were and planting its poison in my veins. I felt my blood turn ice cold. Still, I stabbed and stabbed and stabbed. Eventually, I noticed the thing wasn't moving anymore. I felt a little bad, thinking back to all the good times I had before with my pal, my chum, my little buddy, Squirrel, I'd found on the side of the road. The kitten mewed from one of its cages. I opened the latch, and it crawled out up onto my shoulder. Burrowed its tiny head into my neck, and I enjoyed its warmth, so I kept it. I walked out of there and went straight home, not telling anyone what had happened. Still trying to figure out what to name the little guy. Maybe Sonic. I used to love that game, plus he's really fast, not to mention the rings, which now cover him from head to toe. He's growing, too. And quickly.